Hey there, thanks for tuning in to DuckBricks. I'm Chris and welcome to another episode of Ninjago Retold, the show where I tell the entire history of LEGO Ninjago from the beginning to the end in timeline order, 2011 to 2022. For this week's video, we'll be taking a look at the Garmadon comic book series. It came out as a tie-in for Crystalized, but in terms of the timeline, takes place in between Season 10, March of the Oni, and Season 11, Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu, which is why it's coming out right now and not with the Crystalized stuff. Garmadon was a very character-focused comic, which was a brand new thing for LEGO Ninjago to focus on, published in collaboration with Skybound Comics Group, which has no relation to Ninjago Season 6 Skybound, and focused on Garmadon as he really tried to discover who he was in the wake of being resurrected as Emperor Garmadon. It's a really cool comic. Not a lot of people have read the story, so hopefully you enjoy this special Retold episode. This is now episode 14 of Ninjago Retold, and don't worry because in 2 weeks we'll be continuing with the TV show, starting off with episode 15, part 1, the Fire chapter, coming out in 2 weeks. But as of right now, let's take a look at what Garmadon was up to in between seasons. Let's go. Previously on Ninjago Retold, March of the Oni. After the defeat of Emperor Garmadon and the rebuilding of Ninjago, the dreaded Oni, bringers of darkness, begin their conquest of the 16 realms. As dark clouds engulf Ninjago and the civilians are turned to stone, the ninja are forced to free the former Dark Emperor, who journeyed alongside them in a climactic battle against evil. As Lloyd learned to accept who his father was, and Garmadon gained a deeper understanding of humanity, the heroes make one final stand against the forces of the Oni, reforging the golden weapons to perform the ultimate tornado of creation, which utterly washed away the demonic legions. And as Garmadon leaves the monastery in peace, a new chapter begins, and this is Ninjago Retold.
You're a long way from finding a ninja in these parts, old man.
Lloyd is the Green Ninja.
I am the ultimate Spinjitzu master!
Support me, friends, for one last time.
The new Serpentine War has just begun.
My master has arrived.
Guess it's true. The greatest love stories do always end in tragedy.
Maybe I'm departed.
Control time! Control everything!
I have no son.
I cannot fight you, but I can resist you.
Endings will always come. All we can do is fight to make them good ones.
Protect those who cannot protect themselves.
You were programmed by the game to lose, but you don't have to.
I want you to promise me that you will always stand up to those who are cruel.
We are the keepers of the amulet.
I am. I am the sea. We are one.
There will be peace in the dark.
Episode 14, Garmadon. Chapter 1, 2 Moon Village. The dreaded Oni had been defeated. Peace fell once again on Ninjago. And in the aftermath of the conflict, Wu approached his brother, who had finally removed his helmet, and declared he had only helped save Ninjago so there would be something left to rule. In response, Wu merely stated that he had chosen to stand with the forces of light, and Garmadon could not deny the good his actions had caused. Seizing the Emperor's formidable helm, Wu hurled it off the edge of the cliff to Garmadon's shock, and simply stated that it was just a hat, giving Garmadon his own. With some final parting words that regardless of the path he chooses, he will always be his brother, Wu walked off into the sunset, and Garmadon began a solitary journey across Ninjago to find himself. Months later, on a moonlit night in the forest of Ninjago, an eerie voice whispered Garmadon's name, and the Dark Lord awoke. Demanding the voice reveal themselves, Garmadon was warned not to continue any further, and that he would not survive if he kept his current path in life. Demanding that the accuser emerge from the shadows, Garmadon came face to face with himself, or rather, the Dark Emperor version of himself. Surrounded by darkness and shadow, this evil mirror lunged at Garmadon, proclaiming that this was no sorcery, no tricks, and he simply represented the truth of who Garmadon truly was. Proclaiming he had failed as leader of the Sons of Garmadon, failed as brother to Wu and husband to Misako, and especially failed as father to Lloyd. The true Garmadon rebuked his dark self, saying he was a conqueror, and dealing what he thought was a final blow to his mirror. But to his shock, his sword shattered, and the dark mirror Garmadon simply declared that he was an opponent the true Garmadon could never truly defeat. Screaming in anger and fear, Garmadon awoke, and realized that all that had transpired was merely a dream. And yet, the voice of his dark mirror still haunted him, as he began to ponder who he really was. Journeying across Ninjago, the hybrid Oni scaled mountains, waded through rivers, and sheltered from the pouring rain, until he at last came upon a solitary lake bathed in cool moonlight, and took a chance to rest and eat. But as he ate in silence, he felt the presence of his dark mirror still watching him, and Garmadon was on edge. As a deafening roar echoed through the woods, the spell was broken, and Garmadon rushed to investigate the sound, coming across a pair of villagers, Min and her mother Seiko, fending off a massive brown bear. Believing the bear had been the presence spying on him from the woods, Garmadon lashed out, leaping into battle as he attempted to summon his destructive power, only for it to fizzle out and Garmadon to be beaten back. And to his surprise, the humble villagers protected him, distracting the beast long enough for Garmadon to fell a tree and stun the creature, who fled into the night. Victorious but puzzled as to why his power didn't work, Garmadon turned to the villagers, who thanked him for helping them, but realized that the bear was fighting them the entire time, and the presence he felt down by the lake was someone or something else. Realizing the girl and her mother were in bad shape and needed help, Garmadon briefly considered helping them, before resolving that it was not his problem. But as he began to head off, Min pleaded with the Dark Lord, promising him a hero's welcome and a feast in his honor back at their village. For even this far from Ninjago, tales of Garmadon's fighting prowess had spread, and his name was known throughout the land. As the pair struggled to keep up with Garmadon, who finally agreed to help them, the former Dark Lord conceded, allowing Seiko to ride on his back as they headed to the remote Two Moon Village. And yet, Garmadon continued to be watched by his darker reflection. As the trio approached the village, the bustling town was ablaze with light, Glim Willow factories churning out Two Moon Tea, a powerful substance that enhanced the innate abilities of any powered individual, and acted as a remedy to any illness or injury for mortals. As the villagers huddled in the town square, they were aghast to find they were one barrel short, and brothers Kenzo and Renzo began to argue in the town square, fearing a mysterious group called the Red Crows, who would arrive at sunrise the next day to claim a massive shipment of the mysterious tea. But as the gates clattered open, the villagers encountered Lord Garmadon, traveling alongside Min and Seiko, who rushed to get Seiko some tea, and to Garmadon's shock, he watched as her leg healed instantly. As the King of Shadows was offered a cup of Two Moon Tea to try himself, he conceded and had just a taste of the drink, which funneled through his body, lighting his eyes ablaze with energy as his destructive Oni powers returned to him in full force, and Garmadon began to realize the true importance of this seemingly obscure village. Standing with the village elders, Garmadon learned that Glim Willow Lily could only be harvested on the night of a full moon, and they could normally only produce 1 barrel of tea a month. But as the village sent more and more people in, they disturbed the slumber of the mighty Kuma, guardian of the Glim Willow Woods, who lashed out at any and all intruders. And despite the incredibly potent nature of the tea, it could only make its user more of themselves, meaning mere humans were just healed, while more powerful entities, like Garmadon, a hybrid Oni, would have their innate powers temporarily increased tenfold, promising Garmadon an entire wagon of Two Moon Tea if he aided them against the mysterious threat of the Red Crows. Kenzo and Renzo, village elders, debated amongst themselves while Garmadon began to cackle, for with a massive supply of the potent tea, Ninjago would be his once more. And in the distance, Ultraviolet, former son of Garmadon, watched the village from afar, realizing that Garmadon had returned. As she sped off to an isolated castle headquarters of iron and steel, she arrived in a massive antechamber surrounded by former members of the Sons of Garmadon, and announced that Lord Garmadon had returned. And seated on the throne at the end of the hall, the voice of a hulking, red-skinned warrior echoed across the room. Questioning Ultraviolet of her loyalty since her former master had resurfaced, the leader of the Red Crows, Lord Mogra, was bathed in light. As Ultraviolet swore her fealty to her new master, Mogra unfurled a massive set of ebony wings, revealing that he was wearing Emperor Garmadon's discarded helmet, and announced that the Sons of Garmadon ride no more, but the Red Crows shall fly forever. Chapter 2 Kuma. On the outskirts of 2 Moon Village, Garmadon was awoken by the concerned villagers, who explained that in order to help them fend off the Red Crows, they first needed him to deal with the mighty Kuma, guardian of the woods, to get the Glim Willow lilies they needed to fight back. As Min joined the hunting party to act as a guide, her mother Seiko was furious, demanding Kenzo and Renzo to explain their plan, to which the brothers outlined their plot. Min was to lead the warriors through the forest, while Garmadon could take care of both their bear problem and the Red Crows, who had initially been offered the same deal, but instead simply extorted the villagers of the T, refusing to aid them in their fight with the bears. But to their shock, in the dead of night, the Red Crows arrived, motorcycles rumbling in unison as the formidable gang made way for their leader, Lord Mogra, who simply stated that he would like to leave Garmadon a message, as his steely eyes narrowed. Back in Glim Willow Woods, Garmadon, Min, and the hunters approached Kuma's lair, a massive cave in the shape of a gaping maw. As a hulking, scarred bear approached, Garmadon belittled the threat, stating that he wouldn't even need 2 Moon Tea to face just simply a larger-than-average bear. And as he swum closer to the creature, he lashed out from under the surface of the water, declaring that he now had dominion over the creatures, and if anyone wished to challenge him, they merely needed to step up and face him. But to his surprise, Garmadon was swallowed up by the bear's maw, and he found himself engulfed in darkness, eaten alive. And in the darkness of the bear's stomach, Garmadon was taken by surprise by his dark mirror, who explained that everywhere Garmadon went, he carried the dark mirror with him, and this mirror wished to be free of his bond. Demanding Garmadon to submit and finally realize his true potential, the dark mirror lashed out at Garmadon, to which Garmadon refused, chugging down an entire barrel of tea as power erupted throughout his body, and, lunging out from the bear's mouth, Garmadon in his full, horned Oni form burst through, purple energy crackling from his hands as he blasted the beast with the full destructive might of the Oni, defeating the bear he believed to be Kuma once and for all. But then, the forest began to shake. Garmadon and the villagers watched in horror as the surrounding bears began to bow. As impossibly gargantuan footsteps rippled across the ground, they came face to face with a titanic beast. Rising from the ground itself as rubble hurled down around it, Kuma awoke, demanding the intruder submit. Outraged at their attacks, Kuma breathed in deeply, smelling the stench of Oni blood surrounding Garmadon as he lunged at the elder beast, who declared that while he was powerful by mortal standards, he was nothing compared to Kuma, who was as old and strong as the entire forest itself. Blasting a burst of purple fire at the bear's flowers, Garmadon lit the forest ablaze, enraging Kuma as the massive beast swung at Garmadon, who weaved and dodged its attacks, leading it to a massive cave-in and temporarily trapping the beast, who howled Garmadon's name in fury. And as the villagers came to and explained that drinking an entire barrel of tea would leave Garmadon drained, the Dark Lord merely demanded they take him back for his reward, unaware that Lord Mogra and the Red Crows had ransacked the town, setting it ablaze as they prepared their twisted message to Garmadon. Chapter 3 Sins of the Past. As Garmadon and the crew of hunters cheered and celebrated, returning victorious to 2 Moon Village, they were horrified to see that their town had been set ablaze, for the Red Crows had shown the full might of their vengeance. As Min shrieked for her mother and leapt into the fire, Kenzo whisked her aside, explaining that he had lost track of his brother and Seiko in the chaos, but failing to hold back the impulsive girl who leapt to rescue her mother. And in the wreckage of their former home, Seiko found himself confronted by the hulking Kilo and his crew. As Kilo prepared to beat the hapless civilian senseless, he was halted by Garmadon, who demanded to know why the Sons of Garmadon had ransacked the village. As the terrified minions explained that they now ride as the Red Crows, Garmadon lashed out in anger, hurling Kilo through the roof as he burst out and confronted his former gang. Demanding that Ultraviolet explain herself, Garmadon listened as she told him of the days following his fall as Emperor, how Lloyd and the ninja team had locked them away in Cryptarium, and they bided their time, waiting and waiting and waiting, but Garmadon never came. Once they learned on TV that he had joined the fight with the ninja against the Oni, Kilo and Ultraviolet were irate that their former master had sided with the enemy they had sworn to defeat, and realized that no help would be coming. As days turned to months, and the sons of Garmadon felt forgotten and betrayed, they languished in prison. Until Lord Mogra burst through the walls and came for them, their glorious savior. Back in the present, Garmadon was blasted backwards by the Red-Skinned Lord, wielding an ancient skulkin axe as he commanded his forces to load the wagon with tea, who were now caught between the two lords, unsure of where their loyalties belonged. Realizing that he had to strike Garmadon down in a show of power in order to cement the loyalties of Garmadon's former gang, Mogra lunged at Garmadon, and the two engaged in a deadly battle of muscle, blades, and axes, fighting fiercely as they dealt blow after blow, neither side gaining an advantage over the other. As the two fought, the villagers cowered in fear, declaring in sorrow that they had traded one monster for another, and no matter who won, they would lose. As the elders declared Garmadon was no better than Mogra, Min had doubts, but could do nothing to stop the conflict, as Mogra and Garmadon continued the clash, and the village burned between them. With the two warriors evenly matched, Garmadon leapt for the tea, powering up in his Oni form as he funneled his awesome power in a concentrated stream towards Mogra, only for the mysterious warrior to withstand the full force of his attacks, and drink some of the potent brew himself from storage containers around his neck. As Mogra's helmet, beard, and wings began to glow a brilliant white, he soared at Garmadon, blasting him upwards into the sky as Garmadon screamed in fury and pain. As the two flew higher and higher into the air, Min refused to abandon her new protector, resolving to go back for Garmadon against her mother's wishes as the brutal fight continued, Mogra questioning why Garmadon did not recognize him, and memories of the past flooding back to Garmadon in the process. Rocketing through the air, Mogra cackled as he taunted Garmadon, saying he was the sins of the past come back to haunt him. And as Garmadon began to remember, in his shock, Mogra took the chance to blast the Dark Lord back, sending him plummeting to the ground, utterly defeated. Chapter 4: The Snake in the Garden. In shock and delirious from his defeat and descent, Garmadon heard the voice of his son, Lloyd, as he saw a vision of his son approaching him, forgiving him despite everything he had done. As Garmadon reached for his son, the vision dissipated, and he found Min standing above him, crater formed around the impact of his fall. As the wounded Garmadon drifted in and out of consciousness, Mogra descended upon the people of 2 Moon Village, proudly proclaiming that he had restored peace and order to their lives, and seizing control of all their operations, permanently occupying their home as he renamed it New Mograton. And as the hunt for Garmadon began, Mogra triumphantly declared that Garmadon couldn't seem to be able to use his powers without the tea, which they now controlled the full supply. And yet, unbeknownst to the crows, Psycho had snuck in and stolen some tea, bringing it back to Kenzo and Renzo to keep in storage as the group huddled and prayed for Min to nurse Garmadon back to health, for he may be their only hope. And as Garmadon slept, he dreamed, and visions of his past life flooded back as Garmadon remembered a day long ago, a battle in the days of the Serpentine Wars. In the snow-packed Birchwood Forest, Wu and Garmadon had led Rei, Maya, and the rest of the Elemental Masters in a pitched fight against the Anacondrai warriors, but the devious Chen had sent Klaus to twist the minds of the powerful warlords, and even those who one-sided with Wu, turning them against each other. From Time Twin's Crux in the Chronics to the Elemental Master of Earth and even the Warlord Mogra, Chen's influence ran deep, and on the battlefield, Mogra had turned against the Elemental Alliance, confronting the young Lord Garmadon on the battlefield, declaring that prolonging the resistance against Chen and the Serpentine only lengthened the suffering and death, and Ninjago was paying the price for Wu's selfish nobility. As Mogra outstretched his hand to Garmadon, he tempted him, saying he had seen the darkness growing in his heart, and if they joined forces, they could forge their own destiny together as a team, overthrow both Chen and Wu, and forge a new path for Ninjago. As Garmadon contemplated this request, about to join with Mogra, Wu arrived with reinforcements, leading the elemental masters and battlers from Ch1 Village into battle. As both sides clashed, Wu and Garmadon summoned their glowing Spinjitzu tornadoes as they battered Mogra from both sides, temporarily defeating the warlord, who uttered his final words. He would rejoice when the snake in Wu's garden became a serpent, for he knew Garmadon would be tempted by the dark once more, and it may take years, but a battle between brothers was inevitable. With Garmadon muttering in his sleep, realizing that he was the snake in the garden and the darkness within him would never be erased, Min was accosted by a gang of red crows who were about to capture her and Garmadon until they were saved by the 2 Moon Village commandos, Hunter Lan, Farmer Shu, and Blacksmith Braun, who had formed a strike team of their own to fight back against the tyrants. As Min reunited with her mother and the group of villagers huddled around Garmadon, they debated as to whether or not to use their last reserves of tea to save his life and heal him. Min finally winning out when she said she wanted to save Garmadon not because he could win them the battle, but merely because he was hurt, and he had once saved her and her mother days ago. Pouring what little tea they had into Garmadon's mouth, the hybrid Oni began to shudder, eyes flaming red as he levitated into the air, mind ablaze with light as he awoke in a dreamscape, confronted by his dark mirror, who demanded to know why Garmadon always carried the darkness within himself. Lashing out with his katana, Garmadon demanded to be left alone, only for his dark mirror to multiply and advance, merely repeating that they could not leave Garmadon alone, for he wouldn't let them. As an infinite number of dark selves swarmed around Garmadon, he found himself overwhelmed, the blackness surrounding him until in an instant, everything changed, and Garmadon materialized in the old monastery of Spinjitzu on the fateful day he had been bitten by the Great Devourer and the infection the Overlord had planted seeped into him. Traumatized by the memory and refusing to accept it, Garmadon could only watch as his younger self leapt into the bushes, retrieving the sword even as Wu called out to stop, telling him that there was a snake in the garden. As young Garmadon was bitten and the current form of the Dark Lord could do nothing but yell in protest, the scene shifted again, and he was back in the darkness, confronted by his mirror, who questioned if that's how it really happened. Did Wu know there was a snake in the garden? Was Garmadon really warned about the snake? Or was he simply remembering the past in a different light? Was he remembering it the way he wanted to remember it, instead of how things actually worked? Stating that he had walked the path of darkness to its very end, and it was his turn to figure out what lay beyond that path, the Dark Mirror asked Garmadon a final question. Does the Great Devourer still corrupt your soul, or are your choices your own? Fading away and swirling into nothingness, the mirror Garmadon morphed into his younger self, just a mere boy, asking why he carried this split soul within him, and asking Garmadon the most important question of all: what is it that he truly wanted? Taken aback and confronted with his inner nature for the first time, Garmadon was at a loss for words, and his younger self merely took his hand, stating that figuring out what he wanted for himself was the first step in healing a divided heart. And as Garmadon awoke and power surged around him, he was ready to face his final gauntlet. Chapter 5 Beginnings. As the Red Crows raced through Glimwillow Woods, driving the smaller bears out as they swore to conquer all of Ninjago, Garmadon stood alone at the edge of a river, pondering the question posed by his younger self, until he was approached by the villagers, who returned his hat to him and bid him farewell, saying it was up to them to deal with the Red Crows themselves, and all Garmadon had brought to their town was pain and suffering. As the Dark Lord turned and walked away, still conflicted over what to do, he was embraced by Min, who simply said he may not be able to help being bad, but he didn't have to be evil. Turning into the forest, Garmadon walked away in silence, until he encountered a former foe, the hulking bear, who was already beat up, sporting fresh wounds from an encounter with the Red Crows. As Garmadon began to connect with the bears, empathizing with the creatures as beasts simply wanting to protect their homes, the villagers prepared to use their last stock of dynamite to blow a hole in the wall and free their friends. Just then, Garmadon returned from the shadows on the back of a massive bear with hundreds more behind him, declaring that he had a better use for the dynamite. And as he rejoined with the villagers, he announced a plan to free Kuma and take his revenge on Mogra for defeating him. Until Min chuckled and said she didn't think he came back for revenge, and there was another reason that he had returned, not vengeance, no matter what Garmadon claimed was the case. And as the villagers set Kuma free, the titanic creature rose from the rubble, growling with a low roar as she demanded to know why the humans and bears were working together. Lunging at the vile Oni Garmadon, who was responsible for trapping her, he protected the villagers with his body, selflessly defending them from Kuma, who stopped mid-blow, shocked that Garmadon would sacrifice himself to protect innocents. Realizing that he had changed, Kuma stated that the stench of darkness and evil still lingered over him, and she could never trust a human, especially not an Oni. But when Min begged for Kuma's forgiveness, stating that she now realized they were intruding on the home of the bears, the same way the Red Crows had seized their own home, Kuma realized they had a common enemy, and if Garmadon could deal with Mogra, the bears could work with the humans to drive the crows out. Back in the village, Mogra schemed and plotted with the crows, prepping a gift of 2 Moon tea to bring to the Serpentine, in the hopes that they could be coaxed out from being pacifists. But before they could proceed, Mogra found 2 Moon Village under siege, for legions upon legions of bears had surrounded the village, and on the back of one of the largest beasts, Garmadon had returned, bellowing Mogra's name as he demanded the warrior come out and face him. Refusing to submit, Mogra simply laughed in Garmadon's face, until, lumbering onto the scene, the hulking Kuma smashed into Mogra's defenses, the bears of Glimwillow Wood charged at the Red Crows, and the battle had begun. As claws glinted in the light and blades clashed, the Red Crows battled the bears in a climactic duel, and the battle for 2 Moon Village raged on. But against the combined might of Garmadon, the bears, and the villagers, the Red Crows were no match. Until Lord Mogra drank some tea reserves, powering up and unleashing a devastating shockwave on Kuma, blasting her backwards as Garmadon charged towards the warlord. As the two lords battled once more, Garmadon thought fast, overloading Mogra with tea as he force-fed the warrior more and more capsules, burning up his body with fire as the power became too much for Mogra to handle. Eyes crackling with the brilliant fiery energy and wings set ablaze with fire and light, Mogra's fury knew no bounds, declaring if he had to die, he would take the entire village with him. And as the skies darkened and Mogra plummeted like a comet down to the village, Garmadon's biggest question echoed through his mind. Why are you here? What is it that you fight for? And what is it that you want? Thinking back to the birth of his son, Lloyd Garmadon, and how far he had fallen from that point, everything suddenly became clear. What Garmadon wanted, what he had been fighting for his entire life, was redemption. Unlocking his true potential yet again, Garmadon powered up with a blinding purple light, transforming into a true Oni form, white hair billowing in the wind as blackened horns erupted from his forehead. And as Mogra crashed down, Garmadon resisted, unleashing a devastating blast from his hands as he swept Mogra backwards. In a final blaze of light and power, Mogra was reduced to mere ashes, Garmadon utterly destroying his essence as he burned him up in fire and darkness, falling to the ground utterly exhausted. The next day, the villagers directed the Red Crows to rebuild their village, threatening them with the might of the bears if they refused to help. As Kuma declared that somehow Mogra may have survived, the villagers said that if he ever returned, they would defeat him together. As Min rushed to give Garmadon his helmet back, she found a simple note left in his bedchambers, asking her to hold on to his helmet if they ever recovered it, and simply saying goodbye. And with the sun setting on 2 Moon Village, Garmadon walked off, now resolved to earn his redemption and change his story, be a better person, and truly shed his inner darkness. Divided heart finally at peace, Garmadon ventured back to Ninjago City, resolved to be a force for good and make up for the pain he had caused. Returning briefly to the village to reclaim his helmet and use it as a symbol for good instead, he found himself causing more trouble than anticipated, civilians terrified of him as they fled in fear, despite his twisted attempts to help them. But there was one person who had opened the floodgates for Garmadon to reclaim his morality, Vinny of NGTV News, who months ago had taught Garmadon what it truly meant to live during the Oni invasion. And so, the former Lord of Darkness ventured to Vinny's apartment, seeking advice on how to express his newfound search for redemption. Using his new mastery over the Oni form to shapeshift into a less imposing, two-armed form, Garmadon talked with Vinny, who advised him to smile, be more polite, and be empathetic to the people of Ninjago. And the first step was caring for a simple plant to nurture. As the days grew on, Garmadon took a vow of non-violence, trying to atone for his sins while he raised the plant in Vinny's apartment, affectionately naming it Christopher as he watched over it day after day. And with Garmadon's emotional journey nearly complete and the former master now bent on redemption, a new day dawned on Ninjago and for Garmadon, who had truly evolved from the former brutish, demonic emperor he once was. And with that, thus ends this chapter of Ninjago Retold, Garmadon. In 2 weeks, tune in to episode 15, part 1, the Fire Chapter. Alright, and with that we have summed up our retold episode of Ninjago Garmadon. This was a really interesting type of comic book that is really unlike anything that we've seen from LEGO before, and you see, at the end of the comic book compendium, there was a little bit of a teaser that said Garmadon will return. Whether that means that he would have returned in Crystalized or he will be returning in more issues of the comic book, we have yet to see, but as of right now this has been the first and pretty much only collaboration between Ninjago and Skybound Comics, with hopefully many, many more to come. I hope you enjoyed this special look at the Garmadon comic story. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming away very soon. Let me know if you have any questions about the story or timeline down in the comments.